All right, now to color my spot illustration. I'm going to open up my EPS in Photoshop, but instead of right-clicking on it and opening it with Photoshop, I'm going to first open up a Photoshop file that's the right resolution for what I want to print, because I have to rasterize my color. But if I do it this way, I'll never have to rasterize my black lines. I can keep it as a vector, which means it's infinitely versatile and will always be the highest resolution possible. So I'm going to call this my color skull spot illustration. At 11 inches tall, 11 inches wide, 14 inches tall, 350 pixels per inch. And now I'm going to bring in my EPS right off of the desktop. I'm just going to click and drag it onto the workspace in Photoshop. And then I have to place it. I can hold down Shift and Option and drag it from a corner so there's no distortion, make it pretty big in that space. Hit Return. But the difference is, this is now what's called a smart layer. And as a smart layer, it won't let me color it or mess with it. The reason is because it's always going to use the vector. It's going to refer back to this EPS file, and it's always going to re-rasterize the vector at whatever resolution I need it to be. So this is the ideal way to keep your black line layers for coloring, because they can be resized and never lose resolution, even if you make them bigger. Okay, now I have two layers, right? I have my background layer, which I'm going to call my blank white layer. Just by double-clicking it, I can title it. And then I can lock it. And I want that to stay blank paper white. And then I have my black line layer. And I don't need to lock it. I can lock it, but it doesn't matter because it won't let me do anything on it because it's a smart layer. And I don't want to rasterize it. So just to be safe, maybe I'll lock it. So to color, I need to create a color layer between these two. So I just say New Layer. And I'm going to call this flat color. We're going to go through the basic types of coloring. So, super simple flat color. I'm just going to lasso around the whole thing. Maybe not the drippy parts. I'll get to those. But around the whole skull. And if it were a banana, I would color it yellow. It's a skull, so I have to figure out what the local color of the skull is. So it's going to be probably kind of a brownish gray. So then I'm going to find that color. Maybe a little bit on the greenish side, a little sickly. Or slightly bluish green. Maybe a color like that. Now that color's in my foreground color slot. I'm just going to use the paint bucket tool and drop it into my selection. So I've colored behind everything with flat color. Notice it is separate from the black lines on top. It's like putting a pane of colored glass behind my black leading. Okay, now I might want to make those teeth a different color though. So I'm going to go on top of those. And maybe the teeth will be a more yellowish gray because it's a different substance than bone. I can make an adjustment to my color. Make them a little bit brighter, a little bit yellower. Fill that in. And then the shadow areas, I have to deal with that, but I can't deal with that in flat color. So if this was a Charlie Brown comic, like Charlie Brown does Hamlet. Charlie Brown's Hamlet, and he's in the graveyard looking at the skull of Yorick. This would be how the skull of Yorick is colored, just flat color. I'm just missing one. Maybe I want blood for this drippy stuff, so I'll put in some blood red just in this area. Now notice, because it's halftone, there's no line, so my color is really going to define kind of where the edges of this blood are. And I want to keep it pretty thin. What's nice about the blood red is it will really set off the greens that are in the rest of the design.
5 minutes.
Thank you. So I'm going to fill this with a nice deep red. And the beauty of this is I can always adjust them later. Now red's a really dark value, so that will give some nice variety to the values in my design. Okay, it's starting to look like a nice spot illustration now. So I did that all on one layer. These are all those flat colors together. These are the black lines on top. Now I'm going to spice it up a little bit. I'm going to add another color layer. And this is going to be what's called duotone. Now there are two types of duotone, so I'm going to make this cut edge duotone, which is like cell shading in animation. And cut edge duotone will build new shapes on top of this color, like in the shadows. So there's a nice shadow. And I'm going to use the color selection tool, select this color, and then modify it by making it darker. And fill in that. Then I'll do the same thing in the other areas I want shadow. So maybe I want to actually wrap this shadow around the top like this. I'm going to hold down Shift and do multiple shadows at once. I definitely want it in the eye sockets. I definitely want it in this temple. You can kind of tell from your line work where the shadows should be. I want it underneath the cheekbones and at the sides of the teeth here, sides of the jaw. I want it in the opening for the nose. I want little shadows above each tooth area. Think of them as cutout shapes. Don't be afraid of complexity to your shapes. Okay, now I'm going to use my paint bucket. I already have that dark color selected. And I'm going to fill them all in. Up, I need some here at the brow ridge. Fill that in. What's fun about coloring with duotone is you're deviating from your black lines and making new elements that you can play with. So I can just keep filling them in. See what I think. And you can just do this with a hard edge brush too. But for cut edge, I like to use the lasso. It just makes it a lot like cutting out paper like you would do in Illustrator.
2 minutes more.
All right. Yep, we're going to keep this 10 minutes. Now I just need to do the exact same thing for the teeth. So I'm going to outline the shadows for the teeth, where I think those should be. I already have a lot of kind of inking shadows in there. So this is just in support of that. The more complicated your inking, the less complex your coloring needs to be. So now how do I get that duotone shadow color for the teeth? I use the dropper to select the light local color. Now I'm going to darken it here and fill that in. So duotone is just splitting it into its light and dark values. Probably cap them off a little.
60 seconds.
And then last, I'm going to do some highlights in the red. But this time I'm going to brighten it up. Hold down Shift, I can do multiples.
30 seconds.
Then we'll have a finished duotone color. All right. So that's what the duotone color looks like. That's what it looks like with the black over it, and that's what it would look like as a t-shirt design. Then I save my work as a Photoshop file, so I can return to it.